There are certain ordinary things that don't feel ordinary anymore. A quiet room. A familiar chair. The sound of someone moving around the house like they belong there. I used to think those were the safest parts of my life. The background noise of something stable. Now they just feel like reminders. It's strange how quickly a life can turn into something unrecognizable without anything physically changing. The walls are the same. The routines are the same. Even the person across from you can look the same. But something essential is gone. I didn't lose my marriage in a dramatic moment. There wasn't a single explosion or a clear ending. It was more like waking up one day and realizing I'd been living in a version of my life that wasn't fully mine. Like I'd been sharing a space I didn't know was crowded. I still remember how normal I felt before I knew. I was the kind of person who believed that if you were together, you were together. That trust wasn't something you questioned unless you had a reason. I thought loyalty was simple. You chose someone, and you kept choosing them. And for a long time, I thought that was what we were doing. Looking back, I can see how much I didn't notice. Or maybe I noticed, but I told myself it didn't matter. She was always on her phone, like most people are now. Scrolling, typing, smiling at something on a screen. Sometimes she'd laugh softly, like she was sharing a private joke with someone I couldn't hear. If I asked, she'd say, just a friend, or someone from a group chat. And I never pushed. I didn't want to be that person. The suspicious partner. The one who polices someone else's life. So I let it be normal. That's the part that still sits heavy with me. How easy it was to accept something, just because it fit into the world we live in. Everyone's connected. Everyone's online. Everyone's talking to someone. I thought it meant nothing. The truth is, I didn't cross into doubt because I caught her doing something obvious. It wasn't lipstick on a collar. It wasn't a secret trip. It wasn't a name whispered in the dark. It was something small. Almost stupid. One of those moments you only remember because it became the beginning. I was doing something simple, trying to fix an issue with one of our devices. The kind of boring household task that doesn't carry any emotional weight. At least, it didn't at first. I wasn't searching for anything. I wasn't hunting for proof. I wasn't even thinking about betrayal. I was just clicking through settings, trying to solve a problem. And then I saw something that didn't belong. An account open on a page I didn't recognize. At first, my brain tried to dismiss it immediately. Maybe it was an old login. Maybe it was spam. Maybe it was something accidental. I almost closed it without thinking. But something about it made my stomach tighten. Not fear. Not certainty. Just discomfort. Like hearing your name mentioned in a conversation that stops when you walk into the room. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. And I remember thinking, this is probably nothing. But I also remember my hand hovering over the mouse, hesitating. That was the invisible line. The moment where I was still the person who trusted completely, and the person who couldn't unsee the possibility of something else. I clicked, not because I believed I'd find anything. I clicked because something inside me went quiet. And in that silence, I realized how fragile normal really was. Before I go any further, I just want to say, if stories like this hit close to home, or if you've ever felt that uneasy shift when something in a relationship stops making sense, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need it. Because what I found after that click. It changed the role I thought I had in my own life. And once you notice the first crack, you start to understand how long something can break before it finally falls apart. When I think back to the beginning, nothing about us felt unstable. We weren't dramatic. We weren't the kind of couple people whispered about or worried over. We built our life slowly, the way most people do, routine layered on top of routine until it felt permanent. We met through mutual friends. There wasn't lightning. There wasn't chaos. It was steady. And I liked steady. She was easy to talk to. Not in a loud way. More like she made space for you to finish your thoughts. I remember thinking she felt grounded. Present. In those early months, we spent a lot of time just talking. About work, about family, about what we thought our future might look like. The conversations weren't glamorous, but they felt honest. We'd sit across from each other and map out vague plans. Where we might live. How we'd handle money. Whether we wanted a bigger place one day. It felt like we were building something deliberate. I took pride in being dependable. I showed up when I said I would. I handled what needed handling. Bills, repairs, logistics. I thought that was love, being solid, being reliable. She'd tease me sometimes about being predictable. You like things in straight lines, she once said. I thought she meant it affectionately. When we moved in together, it felt like a natural step. No dramatic milestone. Just a quiet merging of lives. Her things next to mine. Our groceries. Our couch. Our weekends. There's something intimate about sharing everyday boredom. Folding laundry in the same room. Deciding what to eat. Falling asleep at slightly different times but under the same blanket. I believed in those small things. If she stayed up late scrolling on her phone, I didn't question it. I figured it was how she unwound. I'd be half asleep beside her, hearing the faint tapping of her fingers against the screen. Sometimes she'd turn the phone away slightly when I shifted. At the time, I told myself that was just habit. Everyone guards their screen a little. Privacy didn't equal secrecy. And I believed we both deserved privacy. We had inside jokes too. The kind that build up over years. Phrases only we used. Shared references to things that had happened when no one else was around. That's part of why what happened later felt so disorienting. I thought those small rituals were proof of something exclusive. If she seemed distracted sometimes, I chalked it up to stress. Work had been demanding. She talked about online communities she was part of, interest groups, hobby spaces, places where people discuss things I didn't fully understand but didn't feel threatened by. I remember once asking, casually, "Do you ever get tired of being plugged in all the time?" She shrugged. "It's just conversation. It's not that deep." I accepted that. Because from where I was standing, we were fine. We weren't fighting. We weren't cold to each other. We still planned ahead. We still talked about next year like we assumed we'd both be there. I didn't see a gap forming. If anything, I thought we were stable because we didn't need constant reassurance. We moved through our days without drama. That felt mature. Adult. In hindsight, I can see that I measured love by presence in the room. If she was home, if we shared meals, if we discussed bills and errands and family obligations, I assumed that meant we were connected. I didn't think to measure the things I couldn't see. There were moments, small ones, where she'd smile at her phone in a way that felt separate. Not secretive exactly. Just elsewhere. Like she was briefly stepping into another conversation mid-sentence. If I asked what was funny, she'd say, "Just something someone said." I never asked who. Not because I was afraid of the answer. I just didn't think I needed one. Trust, to me, was about not needing details. And I was proud of that. Proud that I wasn't jealous. Proud that I wasn't suspicious. Proud that I believed in us enough to let her have a world that didn't include me in every corner. What I didn't realize was that while I was protecting her independence, I was also assuming I understood the shape of our connection. I believed we were building one life. It never occurred to me that she might be building another version of herself somewhere else at the same time. And I kept mistaking calm for certainty. The shift wasn't sudden. That's what makes it hard to explain, even now. There was no clear moment where I could say, this is when things changed. It was more like watching the tide move. You don't notice it inching forward until the shoreline looks different. At first, everything still looked the same from the outside. We still ate dinner together. We still talked about errands, schedules, family obligations. We still existed in the same space. But the feeling of being with her started to blur. She'd be sitting next to me, legs tucked under her, phone glowing in her hands. I'd say something, and she'd respond a second too late. Not enough to be rude. Just enough to remind me that part of her attention was somewhere else. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling down at the screen, not the quick polite kind of smile, but something softer. Something private. I told myself it was harmless. People laugh at memes. People chat with friends. People escape. That's what I kept repeating. If she turned the screen away slightly when I walked past, I dismissed it. If she paused before answering a message, I assumed she was just thinking. I didn't want to become someone who looked for meaning in every small thing. But I started noticing how often she seemed occupied. Not busy, exactly. Just emotionally elsewhere. There were nights when I'd talk about my day and realize she was only half listening. Her eyes would flick down every few minutes. Her fingers would tap out replies faster than she could pretend she wasn't doing it. Once, I stopped mid-sentence. She looked up. What? Nothing, I said. Just tired. She nodded, like that explained everything. And maybe it did. At the time, I blamed myself before I blamed anything else. I thought maybe I was boring. Maybe the rhythm of our life had become too predictable. Maybe this was just what long-term relationships looked like, two people sharing space while also carrying separate worlds. I didn't want to be naive, but I also didn't want to be paranoid. So I stayed quiet. The strange thing is, she wasn't cruel. She wasn't openly distant. She still kissed me goodbye. Still asked if I wanted coffee. Still remembered birthdays and appointments. That's what made it confusing. How could something be wrong when nothing was obviously wrong? It wasn't like she disappeared. It was more like she was present in pieces. There were moments when I'd reach for her hand and she'd squeeze back automatically, but her eyes would still be on the screen. Or we'd be watching something together, and she'd laugh a beat too late because she was reading something else at the same time. I started to feel like I was sharing her attention with an invisible room. I didn't know what was in that room. I just knew she kept stepping into it. Every once in a while, I'd ask, lightly, "Who are you talking to?" And she'd answer without hesitation. Just people. People. Friends. Someone from a group. Always vague. Always casual. And because she wasn't defensive, I didn't feel justified pressing further. If anything, her calmness made me feel silly for even asking. So I'd drop it. There were other small changes too. She'd take her phone with her everywhere, even for quick trips across the house. If she left it behind, she'd come back for it almost immediately. Like it wasn't an object. Like it was a connection she couldn't afford to lose for even a few minutes. I noticed that. I just didn't name it. I think part of me was afraid that if I named it, I'd have to deal with what it meant. And I wasn't ready for that. It's strange how you can sense distance before you understand it. Like your body picks up on something your mind refuses to accept. There were nights I'd lie awake beside her, listening to the soft tapping of her screen, and feel an emotion I couldn't fully identify. Not anger. Not fear. Just loneliness. Even though she was right there. And I kept telling myself it was normal. That everyone drifts a little. That couples settle into routines. That not every smile has a story behind it. I kept believing that because the alternative felt too heavy to hold. But somewhere deep down, without admitting it, I started to understand that presence and closeness weren't the same thing. And something between us was quietly splitting in two. The night I found it wasn't dramatic. There was no argument beforehand. No cold silence. No suspicious behavior that pushed me into action. It was a normal evening. The kind that blurs into every other one. Something on our shared computer had been glitching for days. A minor annoyance. I finally decided to deal with it. She was in the other room, shower running, music playing faintly through the wall. I remember feeling productive. Focused on something simple and fixable. I wasn't thinking about us. I was clicking through browser settings, clearing saved data, trying to figure out why certain pages kept loading wrong. Just routine troubleshooting. That's when I noticed a tab still open under a different profile. At first, I assumed it was mine. I clicked it without thinking. It wasn't. The username wasn't one I recognized immediately. It wasn't her full name. It wasn't a nickname I'd heard before. But something about it tugged at me. I stared at it longer than necessary. There was a familiarity to the phrasing. A combination of words that felt like her sense of humor. Something subtle. I told myself I was overthinking. I almost closed it. Then I saw the profile picture. Not a photo of her face. Just an image I knew she liked. Something she'd mentioned before, something specific enough that my stomach dropped a little. It could still have been coincidence. That's what I told myself. But the account was logged in. I didn't have to guess. My hand hesitated over the mouse. I remember feeling two separate instincts fighting inside me. One said close it. Respect privacy. Don't become the kind of person who digs. The other said you already saw enough to know this isn't random. I clicked into the messages. At first, nothing jumped out as explosive. Just long threads. Casual exchanges. Inside jokes. Conversations that stretched back farther than I expected. Farther than months. Years. My chest tightened. I scrolled. Daily check-ins. Good morning messages. Good night messages. Updates about small details of her day, the kind of details she sometimes forgot to mention to me. There was a rhythm to it. A pattern of emotional consistency. I kept reading, hoping I'd find something that downgraded it. Something that made it clearly platonic. Clearly harmless. Instead, the language shifted slowly as I moved through older threads. Pet names. Shared frustrations. Private references I didn't understand. And then something that made my hands go cold. Plans. Not travel plans. Not vague, one-day dreams. But conversations about a future together. About what life would look like when the timing was right. About sacrifices. About patience. They referred to each other in ways that weren't ambiguous. Not joking. Not ironic. There was a seriousness beneath it. At one point, he called her his wife. And she didn't correct him. She responded like it was natural. Like it had already been decided. I felt like I was reading a script from a parallel version of my life. A version where I wasn't the primary partner. Where I was the complication. There were messages where they talked about me. Not cruelly. Not viciously. Just, dismissively. As if I were temporary. A phase that would eventually resolve itself. An obstacle in the way of something real. That word showed up more than once. Real. I remember staring at the screen and feeling like the air had thinned. This wasn't flirting. It wasn't a brief lapse. It was a relationship. Structured. Maintained. Fed daily. I scrolled back to the beginning. It predated so many things I thought were milestones for us. Vacations we took. Decisions we made. Moments I believed meant something permanent. She had been building this alongside me. I tried to measure it in my head. If love is time, they had time. If love is attention, they had that too. If love is sharing your fears, your hopes, your mundane thoughts before bed, they had all of it. And I hadn't known. That was the part that broke something in me. Not just that she cared about someone else, but that she had been living in a second emotional world for so long, and I had been walking around unaware. I wasn't angry at first. I was disoriented. Like I had stepped through a doorway in my own house and found an entirely different structure built behind the walls. I kept scrolling even when I knew I shouldn't. I kept reading until the words started to blur. There was no single message that ended us. It was the accumulation. The consistency. The devotion. And the worst part was realizing that while I thought we were sharing one life, she had already split hers in two. By the time I heard the shower turn off in the other room, I wasn't the same person who had sat down at that computer. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do with what I'd seen. I didn't confront her right away. I closed the browser. I fixed the glitch. I even shut the computer down like nothing had happened. When she walked back into the room, hair damp, asking something ordinary about dinner, I remember staring at her face and thinking, "How long have you been somewhere else?" But I didn't say it. I needed to hear her voice first. Needed to see if I could detect anything different. There wasn't. That almost made it worse. I waited until later that night. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on but muted. She was scrolling again, the glow lighting up her face. I said her name. She looked up. Yeah. I saw something earlier. On the computer. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough. What do you mean? There was an account open. Messages. Her expression didn't collapse. It shifted. Slight tightening around the eyes. A recalibration. You went through my stuff? I didn't go looking, I said. It was already there. Another pause. Then she exhaled. It's not what you think. That sentence felt rehearsed. Not necessarily practiced, but familiar. Like she'd anticipated this moment in some distant way. I read enough, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. It didn't look small. She set the phone down slowly. It's online, she said. It's not real. Not real. I remember repeating that in my head, trying to understand it. You talk to him every day, I said. For years. It's just words. You call each other husband and wife. She winced slightly. That's just language. It's not literal. I felt something shift in my chest then. Not explosive anger. More like a quiet collapse. You planned a future, I said. It's hypothetical, she replied quickly. It's not like we've met. It's not physical. There it was. The defense. No physical contact. As if that was the only line that mattered. I tried to explain what it felt like reading those messages. The intimacy. The routines. The way she shared parts of her day with him that she sometimes skipped with me. She shook her head. You're making it bigger than it is. How is it small? I asked. It's a connection, she said. It doesn't replace you. But it had. Maybe not in a visible way. Maybe not in terms of shared bills or shared space. But in time. In attention. In emotional energy. You talked about me, I said quietly. She looked away. We were just venting. Like I was a coworker. Or a traffic jam. Something inconvenient. It's not like I was going to leave, she added. It's just something that existed. Something that existed. I realized then that we were arguing about definitions. To her, real meant physical presence. Touch. Proximity. To me, real meant investment. It meant choosing someone with your attention every day. You built a whole relationship, I said. You just didn't have to pack a bag to do it. She rubbed her temples. You don't understand. It's different online. Different didn't mean harmless. I wanted her to say she'd crossed a line. That she'd messed up. That she saw what I saw. Instead, she kept minimizing it. Softening it. Turning it into something abstract. It wasn't going to replace this, she said. But I was sitting there feeling like I'd already been replaced in ways that didn't require a suitcase. The hardest part wasn't the messages. It was realizing she didn't see the depth of it the way I did. Or maybe she did, and couldn't admit it. Either way, we were no longer standing in the same reality. And I couldn't tell which version of our marriage she believed in more. After that conversation, the house felt different. Not louder. Not colder. Just thinner. Like the air between us had lost weight. We still moved around each other. Still asked practical questions. Did you pay that bill? Are you working late tomorrow? The mechanics of our life kept running. But something underneath had stopped. I started noticing how often she still reached for her phone. At first, she tried to be subtle about it. Leaving it face down. Taking it into another room. Saying she needed space when I lingered nearby. One night I asked, "Are you still talking to him?" She hesitated. Not like before. That answer didn't comfort me. Not like before meant not zero. I realized then that I wasn't just competing with a person. I was competing with an entire emotional world she'd built over years. I couldn't erase that with one confrontation. Trust, I learned, doesn't snap cleanly. It frays. I'd look at her and wonder which parts of her day were shared with me out of habit, and which parts were being sent somewhere else first. I stopped telling her certain things. Small things at first. A frustrating moment at work. A thought that crossed my mind. Something funny I saw. I'd start to speak, then think, she probably already told him. That assumption changed me. I became quieter. More observant. Less certain of my place. We tried to talk about it again, but the conversations kept circling the same point. It wasn't physical, she'd say. It wasn't imaginary, I'd answer. Neither of us moved. At some point, I realized I wasn't trying to win the argument anymore. I was trying to figure out whether I could live in a relationship where I had to compete with a screen. Where devotion could be divided without technically breaking a rule. The illusion wasn't just that she hadn't touched someone else. It was that I thought emotional loyalty was automatic. I thought choosing someone meant choosing them completely. Now I wasn't sure we'd ever define that the same way. There were nights we lay in bed facing opposite directions, not angry enough to shout, but too unsettled to reach for each other. The silence felt heavier than any fight. I started imagining what rebuilding would require. Passwords shared. Accounts deleted. Years of messages erased. But even if she deleted everything, I couldn't delete the knowledge that it had existed. That she had loved someone else in a way she insisted didn't count. The final crack came quietly. I was sitting across from her at the table, watching her check her phone again. Not hiding it. Not apologizing. Just continuing. And I realized I didn't feel jealous anymore. I felt tired. Tired of arguing over definitions. Tired of trying to prove that something invisible could still be real. In that moment, I understood that even if she stayed physically beside me, I would always wonder who else she was choosing with her attention. And I didn't know if I could live the rest of my life asking that question. Time didn't fix it. But time did something else. It gave me distance. In the weeks after everything cracked open, I kept replaying it in my head like a scene I could edit if I thought about it hard enough. I kept asking myself what counted and what didn't. Was it cheating if no one ever touched? Was it betrayal if it lived behind a screen? At first, I felt almost embarrassed by how much it hurt. Like I didn't have the right to be devastated because there wasn't a hotel room or a secret date. But the longer I sat with it, the clearer it became. It wasn't about bodies. It was about devotion. It was about the fact that she gave someone else the parts of herself that were supposed to belong in the space between us. The daily check-ins. The private comfort. The language of commitment. That's not nothing. I started noticing how often people dismiss emotional affairs because they're harder to explain. There's no obvious photograph. No physical proof that feels universally understood. But emotional intimacy is still intimacy. And secrecy is still secrecy. Looking back, the warning signs weren't dramatic. They were ordinary. The constant phone presence. The distant smiles. The way her attention slipped away in pieces. I didn't want to see it because seeing it would have meant admitting that a relationship can end long before anyone leaves the room. If you're listening to this and you've ever questioned whether something counts just because it wasn't physical, I want to know what you think. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, and comment below, because this is one of those situations where everyone draws the line differently. For me, the delayed validation came when I finally stopped arguing with myself. It was real. The hurt was real. And the fact that it happened quietly didn't make it any less devastating. It just meant I was the last one to understand what was already happening.